Nein, Vince Prince, Servus. Das ist Official Gameplay, der Trailer, der jetzt erscheint. Haha, Waschi. Countdown zum Countdown, bitte.
Welcome to the second of 4 of our community-led deep dives for NHL 22. You guys wanted to see some more gameplay, so today we're showcasing over 25 minutes of overhead gameplay for your viewing pleasure. We also worked with No Sleeves and Henrique to collect the top questions coming straight from you around gameplay and any concerns you had coming out of the closed technical test. Ben and Tyson from the gameplay team gave some great answers behind their thought process around NHL 22 that I think you will find pretty insightful. The full Q&A actually goes on for over an hour and a half, so we've selected the top questions for YouTube, but we will have a full-length version up on Spotify, and you'll be able to find that link in the description. I'm now joined by Ben, Tyson, Henrique, and No Sleeves. Let's jump right into this, and I actually want to go ahead and ask the first question. For those who played the game early through the technical test, passing seemed to be a hot topic. People either love it or they struggle with it. What changed with passing this year, and what was the thinking behind that decision?
That's definitely the big pressing question out of the tech test. I think that the general meta has been a bit polarizing. We often get from people that they want the game to feel like the game that they loved. At the same time, they challenge us to change it every single year. So
das wäre nice, Danny Styler.
We always go
Nein,
back
heute
to
nicht, Max.
what our community has said from the previous year, from competitive community, those looking for more realism, that kind of stuff, and then equate that back to kind of the real world NHL. So we aren't making a lot of decisions very often around just what's a game mechanic change we can make. We're always looking back at all those elements and trying to see where we might not be doing something that's expected based on how things work in the real world. And then when that taps into what's happening with the meta within our game, that's sort of the best case scenario, because it means that people want that change regardless of sort of where you sit in sort of realism versus competitive play and that kind of stuff. And then when we can tap into authenticity, we try to do that as well. So when it comes to passing, we wanted to make sure that the tougher passes to make weren't just as easy as the simpler ones. So when you're powering up your passes or you're passing blind, sort of behind yourself against your momentum, you're not going to get as much pass assist as you did in the past. There's also a lot more depth when it comes to player attributes. Also, we had the introduction of X factors this year with some specific passing ones. The high level was just to make sure that people could still equate these things to what they see in the real world NHL or when they're on the ice themselves. So you obviously can't pass as hard on your backhand as you can your forehand. It's tougher to make passes against your momentum. These are all things that we've had in our shot model before. So when we looked specifically at the call out for forced cross crease passes, we did want to make sure that those were more earned. So it comes down to player twitch skill and also all the pieces that, again, you can equate to what it means to pass in the real world. So a strong pass with your momentum on your forehand is obviously going to be far better than one against your momentum on your backhand behind you. So that's sort of the core piece there. As we get into this, Tyson will be able to dive into what we've done with specific X factors, how the attributes weigh in, how we wanted to separate players from our licensed roster, and then how that will also fit into modes like Ultimate Team and what that means for World HL when you're creating your own players as well.
All right, guys, before I get into my first question, I want to thank you guys for having me for this talk. I just want to touch on the passing from the closed technical test that people either, loved it or struggled with it. Specifically on receptions of the pass. So when players were receiving it, that seemed to be kind of universally maybe disliked. It just seemed like they weren't handling the puck cleanly. Do you agree with that? And is it something that you're going to focus on maybe adjusting before launch, or do you think it's working as intended?
Yeah, I think it's tough for us because like over the years, and I think back to when we were trying to get ESHL, World HL stuff back going from NHL 16, and I thought back to even some of the goals that I had when I was running some stuff for gameplay in NHL 13 and 14.
Colorado hätte vom Salary Cap
ihn
sich nicht mehr leisten können für das Gehalt.
So it is a bit of a struggle for us to have passing and receptions differentiate players and not have people feel that we're discouraging team play. We don't want players just bobbling pucks for the sake of bobbling them. I know that we have a lot of players in the community that really tune in the sim aspects of game, especially when they're playing offline franchise. And it's really cool to check out kind of what some of those tunings look like as players try to increase period lengths and get realistic stats and that kind of stuff. But especially in the online competitive space, and when you've got maybe like 6v6 full online, we're not really looking to kind of discourage great team play and great playmaking. At the same time, defenders need to know what the most dangerous scenarios are. If you can make a great cross-seam backhand pass tape to tape all the time, there isn't an advantage to kind of get a player to like close them off where they are losing sort of their forehand, or they're pushed into the corners or away from sort of the momentum of the play. So we're trying to get as many of those elements in to add depth and to add more skill gap for players.
27 Minuten.
For what will bring them more success. But at the same time, we are taking all that feedback to make sure that we are still rewarding and encouraging team play over kind of the individual puck hog style and that kind of stuff. And you'll see that that comes through in how we tune the puck carrier and sort of what they can get away with as well. But it's really all a sum of the parts kind of experience as we tune things.
That's a lot of interesting information, guys, especially I'm big on the removing of the auto sauce. I think that's a great change. And it kind of leads into my first question in regards to NHL 21, actually. Defensive pass intercepts in NHL 21 seem to be like non-existent. What was the cause of that, and how has that changed in 22?
This has always been an interesting one, and I think the highest level piece that's good kind of talk to the community about. I've kind of had some conversations on Twitter and sometimes some like Twitter DMs
teilweise
with some really passionate players and stuff.
Ist halt immer mehr im
conversations. Back when I was more active, like on our forums, we talk about this kind of stuff. And again, it's kind of the high level goals between kind of realism versus Twitch skill when it comes to the competitive space. When it comes to the competitive side of our game, we often hear from a lot of players that they really want to make sure that everything that happens is because of a button that they pressed. And I would often get into these discussions with players about just rewarding positioning in general. Like, how much is it something that I'm manually doing just by being in possession, being in the right place to give myself enough reaction time in a passing lane, versus manually pressing pass block or poke check to deflect a puck and that kind of thing. So we actually had turned off our old pass disruption model in the online space. So for players who played offline, you would have continued to see basically what were like these poke checks where players could defend passing lanes automatically, just the same as they would play an automatic pass reception or pickup. They would poke pucks. But in the online space, because we were asked to generate a bigger skill gap, and especially when players would perform these actions when they didn't expect them, maybe it would disrupt their skating.
Also man sieht es halt an den Lichteffekten, es sind Kleinigkeiten, die man sehen wird. Und bei der Grafik ist es halt sowieso, oder bei der Kameraperspektive sowieso weiter weg.
Players saying, well, why isn't my player reacting? And if people that played, I think it was last year's beta, remember at one point pass receptions were too powerful. Players were reaching behind their back and receiving these pucks cleanly and that kind of thing. So really we had kind of two mechanics. We had the pass disruptions and then we had the pickups. And we needed to tune the pickups. Like once players saw those and they saw that they were overdone, it was obvious because we all watch real world hockey all the time and we know what's believable and what's realistic. And
sind halt die Details, Ilmi, genau.
Some things are heightened within a 4-minute period experience.
Auch die Abnutzung des Eises sieht sehr schön aus.
Like, hey, that's just like
98, meins 99 Dungeon. Aber nicht so exzessiv.
My friends are playing in competitive leagues and that kind of thing. So when somebody reaches behind their back and just like glue, the puck stuck to their tape, we all know that that's unrealistic. And even if we want to see a player break up those passes, it can't be done in that way. Otherwise, it kind of breaks that overall realism and immersion to what is otherwise simulation hockey. So we tuned those to be realistic, and you were at a point last year where if you didn't receive the puck cleanly, you wouldn't play an attempt at all. So you would see players play pickups if they could receive the puck clean.
Also es sieht wesentlich flüssiger aus. Grafische Unterschiede gibt es auch. Ist halt immer das Ding selber zu spielen, das Feeling zu erleben. Und vom Feeling her war es doch besser als NHL 21. Ich freue mich so drauf, Leute.
Of the game, how to overcome those things. And then there was other times where we continued to get sent footage saying like, hey, this puck went right between my legs, what am I supposed to do? And without getting into this whole sort of description that I had just given you now, we were kind of like, yeah, I agree, players could make those plays.
Die Scene-Bar ist weiterhin unten, so wie es scheint. Bleibt so, das heißt, ich kann mein neues Overlay wahrscheinlich danach ausrichten.
And we thought that we could this year turn back on what we're calling kind of like these reflex disrupts. So if you're not able to react fast enough or have enough time to play a nice clean pickup reception, your player can still play a reflex reaction, so they can kind of flinch with their skate or that kind of stuff. And again, I'll sort of throw it to Tyson to explain exactly how we executed that. But it really was adding in these reflex.
Nein, die Overhead-Cam, die nimmt viel weg aufgrund der Entfernung, das stimmt. Deshalb spiele ich auch gerne dynamisch mittel, damit man einfach ein bisschen mehr sieht. Was sehen meine müden Augen? Servus, Silver Dallas. Herzlich willkommen, hallihallo. Wie geht's dir? So ist es also, Kinder.
So with that, I'll throw it to Tyson to kind of explain again sort of how the attributes weigh in, how we got the player differentiation, and some of the X factors that come into play to make that work.
So we have a much better distinction within
NHL Breakaway, es gab auch NHL Hits und so.
Itself, whether you can react to it at all. So if somebody's
Leider nein, Syro. Wunderschönen guten Abend.
You may not be able to react to it at all. Then the next levels, if you can react to it and just throw in like a poke check or skate or something like that, you may incidentally hit the puck or you may not, based off some of your defensive awareness, or mostly defensive awareness actually, since that's kind of like your reaction time stat on the defensive side of things. And then whether you can get to the puck position, but you bobble it if it's too hot to handle, if it's not a flat pass, and that kind of ties into your hand-eye if it's in the air, whether you can kind of receive that, knock it down clean. And then puck control is more on the side of if you can just receive it off the ice. And then the fourth is if you receive it clean, so that factors in your defensive awareness, your hand-eye if it's in the air, your puck control if it's on the ice. And then I think users should notice a lot more nuance there instead of last year where it was very kind of you either picked off the pass or your player didn't react to it at all, which obviously feels really bad if you're sitting in the lane and the player you're controlling just doesn't do anything. It just makes them look unaware and unathletic. So we wanted to add that kind of like gradient of if you can react to the puck or if you can grab it clean or not. And then we added a lot more animation coverage for intercepting passes with both your stick, your skate, if it's
Nein, da ist Winnipeg!
On the ice. There's a ton
Aus Freiburg,
of animation for
Süddeutschland.
Normal players, and then even players with the ability have even more animations and coverage that they can disrupt passes, more so in the air.
Ja,
and
sind dabei,
kind of
Moritz.
More reaching ones, I guess, is where we put most of the emphasis for some of those X Factor abilities. Overall, like players across the board will have much more opportunity to intercept or at least get a piece of passes this year.
Thanks for the explanation, guys. Actually, that makes a lot of sense now, just in terms of what you guys were saying about turning off that system that was in the game beforehand. And I'm not going to lie, the closed technical test, it felt like intercepts were completely different and a welcomed addition to 22. But I'm going to throw the next question over to my man, Henrique.
Yeah, happy to be here, of course. And
Henrique, auch ein cooler Typ.
22 soon. So this question is always a big one, though. Speed, of course, always a big factor in the game. It's always a major topic. So there is instances in which a much faster player cannot get space against a much slower one. What could cause that?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. It's a good example of a question that kind of gets asked, and sometimes we even get kind of confused by it because there's sometimes questions get asked and we say, well, yeah, we did that on purpose. Then we kind of we need to look further into the details of sort of what people are experiencing and that kind of thing. But in terms of speed, we obviously really want skating to separate players. And over the last few years, we've looked back to kind of like how I was sort of mentioning off the top of looking at sort of the core meta of our game and how it plays, and then looking back to the real world for cues on where we might not be doing
Da bin ich gespannt, ob man die Geschwindigkeit so hinbekommt, dass die Spieler unterschiedlich schnell sind. Dass man das merken wird, da bin ich mega gespannt. Das wird cool. Ich auch, Hoggeball.
Last year, for example, we had made some of the changes around pivots because the way our skate model worked, players were able to kind of start accelerating and gain speed. For example, if they're skating backwards and then they need to pivot to skate forwards if they're going to get burned, they would start getting more acceleration before they really kind of got their hips around and got that first foot planted. Unlike the real world where that extra step or two is the difference between losing that step or not. So there's things that we've been doing just as we've moved along to improve our core mechanics to kind of achieve those differences and gaps. And then when we look at the general sense of speed, there's so much more that goes into it. Like we'll have players reach out and say, hey, like this player has a higher rating and they're pretty sure that they're fresh, they have a full stamina, like why are they getting burned? And it can really be the difference. Like we see these NHL players play and the difference in a breakaway or not, or a player splitting the defense, or getting behind a defensive player to get a pass. Like these are single steps sometimes, and there aren't many players
das Jersey
in the
ist so
NHL
nice.
that can play on a daily basis.
Speed ist wichtig. Grüße aus der Suchtklinik. Servus, eurer!
So for us in our game, it can be a really finite difference, and I think it really comes down to that. And it's not really to kind of make excuses around it, but it's something that we're interested in to kind of go, what do we need to kind of emphasize when it comes to gameplay meta? Maybe that sort of is or isn't sort of realistic. Like we need to understand why players are experiencing these things in our games, because you can be really quick with your thumb, or when you're viewing the game from a higher view and not on the ice, there's different ways that reaction time plays out there. So even sometimes when we're realistic, it may not give the same sense of what it's like for players on the ice to lose that step or not. So I think that plays into it as well. And then the other thing is, we have different game styles in our game, especially like all the core players will know this really well, but all of our competitive modes online use the competitive game style. And we obviously have full sim above that. One of the differences there is our acceleration setting. So on full sim, acceleration is a little bit more realistic. It's a little bit slower to get going, which adds a bigger gap between players. But we actually, I don't know, it might have been like 3 or 4 years ago now, we increased acceleration in our competitive game style. And that was really from feedback from the community around wanting faster play, more twitch response, feeling that, hey, because I am playing from a bird's eye view, I need that game to move faster so that it's like it is when it's on the ice. And I think the community originally had thought that that would provide more gaps. But really, if you think about situations where players are burned and they need to get back, acceleration is actually the one thing that's actually going to benefit them more than, say, top speed or something. So we've still been kind of batting around the idea of whether acceleration itself should come down a bit, and then that would help some of those scenarios. We still have a big difference between players, all the attributes matter, that kind of thing. But within these core game styles, we can kind of raise the ceiling or sort of raise the floor, which kind of increases or decreases the gaps when you're looking at a player who's like an 85 Excel versus a 90, or an 88 speed versus a 92, that kind of thing. Again, kind of an ongoing discussion on sort of what we're missing there, but one thing players will notice this year is within agility, and we saw some of that called out during the technical tests. It's interesting, it kind of comes through as positive and negative feedback. Again, kind of player differentiation being a positive, but then sort of the feel of your player, oh, my player feels sluggish, I can't get them going. So it's hard for us to balance those things.
Ach so, okay. Schwerfällig, Eva, jetzt habe ich es verstanden, ja. Es wirkt tatsächlich so, aber das ist ja Offline-Gameplay. Und man hat vorhin gesagt, man hat Hockey Ultimate Team und so 6 vs 6 auch ein bisschen angepasst, dass der Spielfluss nicht verloren geht. Da bin ich gespannt, wie sich das unterscheidet.
What we kind of bat around in our head in terms of Twitch game mechanics, realism, and that we are at the end of the day really listening to the community when it comes to those things. And I do feel that when players do take advantage of gaps and making sure that they do hustle ahead, don't start deking too early, that we do see players keep their breakaways, and we have seen players this year, especially with some of the X factors and the difference we made last year in pivots. We are seeing speed through the neutral zone, players that are able to pick up the pucks at speed, able to separate themselves. But it's something that we'll continue to monitor, and it's really great when the community kind of sends in clips to show us specific examples, because when these things are said rather than shown, sometimes we think we're aligned and we're not, and I think that's a really good thing for the community as well, that when they're sort of asking for something that we can't necessarily isolate, because it really is the sum of the parts, right? When it comes down to all the things I was speaking to, we really want to make sure that we take all those things into account, because one change in one area can drastically impact everything else. So again, if players want really quick twitch response, it might actually mean that skating actually doesn't have the depth, or the player separation
4. Oktober,
that you
nächste
would
Woche.
otherwise want for the meta of the game to increase.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there's a fine line, you know, with every change, especially with speed.
So ist es. Servus,
very
Lemmy!
exciting and good for NHL 22. You moved to Frostbite this year, right? So Frostbite, of course, great on the graphics, like that's a huge improvement over there. But what type of impact does Frostbite have on the gameplay overall for the game?
It's interesting, like within our core gameplay and the way it's done, like you said, Frostbite opens up a lot of doors for the art team, sort of within the way that the engine's set up, and for those teams to share a lot of the great work that was done before to the engine. For us on the gameplay side, it will also being able to work closer with some of the other teams that have been there before us. I think that's always the best thing about being on shared engine. So for all of us in sports to be able to share things going forward, then you're not kind of building things from scratch, doing it your own way, unless it's necessary. So in the past, teams may have done similar things over and over again. And we haven't sort of been stopped. Like when we put in the new skating engine, that was already shared technology from sort of a central group, and we were able to work on that, and that allowed us to achieve a high bar in the very first year that we put it in, and we continue to be able to build on it and then learn from other groups. So I think it really just expands the amount of times that we can do that, and the more that you're kind of tap into what other teams are doing, then you can kind of take or leave the things that work for your sport, because obviously there's some things that are similar and other things that are different. But at the base level, like when you're looking at skating systems or locomotion engines, that kind of thing, although players are running around in football and soccer, and we're skating, the base tech behind sort of animation blending and that kind of stuff is something that is useful for everybody. So at a base level, it may not make sense of sort of what we can share with some of those other teams, but at a technology level, it adds a lot of benefits. And then I think the other piece with anything, kind of when you're going to a new engine, as the art teams are looking to kind of push their bar, it means that we need to do the same on the gameplay side. So when it came to the stick and physics, it was the right year to do it. If we were going to really push the visual fidelity, and especially going for the years forward of looking at ways to continue to push the new consoles and see what we can do there.
Das ist die Engine.
Sort of
auf die das Spiel läuft, und das war immer die EA Ignite Engine, und jetzt hat man es auf die Frostbite migriert, 4T.
Really stand out. So for us to have sticks through the boards or sticks going through players' legs, I think we got to the point from a mechanic perspective where we started to tune those things pretty well. But when players are looking to the real world of like, well, why didn't my player pick up that puck then?
Einfach
you have to go into a
TSP.
replay and say, well, 6 frames before that, your stick went through a leg, so we blocked you out of being able to pick up that puck because we believed that X amount of time it would take for you to avoid that player and get it around. And now that we have the stick and physics, again, holding up to the increase in overall visual quality, we get to solve some of those things. And visually, the game will make more sense to players. They're like, oh, I get it. I couldn't receive that puck because my stick was caught up on that player and I need to get around them first. Or I was able to take that player's stick out of the play, and that's why they lost possession. That kind of thing. So there is a piece to Frostbite and just the general push from the team to increase that overall level of fidelity that's pushed the gameplay team. So not necessarily something that we had to
Schaut euch mal an, wie das Eis aussieht.
For,
Abgenutzt und die
really
Spiegelung.
challenging, and we needed
Gefällt
an
mir
engineer
gut.
that was excited to take on that challenge, and this was the
Beim
right year
Gameplay
for
wird
it.
sich
So in some
zeigen,
cases,
wie sie es
it's
dann
the
selber
engine opening
spielt.
up opportunity, and the other case, it's sort of the right time to dive into that kind of stuff as well.
I kind of just want to piggyback on that. So in NHL 22, obviously the stick and physics has been added to the game. It's a new layer to the game. Compared to the past really big additions to gameplay, like the skill stick or even the defensive skill stick, how do you guys rate it compared to those in terms of how it's going to impact gameplay?
When we first started, we had no idea what we'd be able to do. Like, this is something that's been on a wish list since before I ever joined the NHL team. Like, I remember seeing it as just a fan of the game on internet topics, people chatting about, like, oh, why does sticks go through the boards and that kind of thing. And then when I was in the seat as a gameplay producer and designer, trying to figure out, can you solve these problems, we always kind of had conversations with the community around whether it was the right time to take that on. And I totally see it through the lens of players that were challenging at that on us, going like, well, it's just not realistic. Why would you ever do it that way? But when we've tried to do things like that in the past, players have actually lost control that arguably they should still have in the real world. So being able to kind of navigate near the boards, as much as it allowed you to do some things that were unrealistic, it allowed you to kind of cycle the puck and stay down low. And if you were forced
Jetzt sieht man es mal ein bisschen von nahem. Die Gesichter sehen schön aus. Auch hier jetzt die Spiegelung im Replay. Sieht Bombe aus. Sieht echt Bombe aus. Viva Las Vegas, Baby. Ich hoffe, du spielst für die Army-Krebse. Die wackeln auch, Timo. Die Netze wackeln.
Players on our forums and stuff like, oh, well, just let us try it, right? I didn't want to kind of take our word for it, but I think that when we had done some of those things, it was really cool from a tech test perspective. If we had put out demos, I think that people that are really into the simulation side of things would have gone like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, I don't care if I lose the puck, and it's just great to have that in the game.
Pandur.
But we weren't ready for something like that to kind of take the main stage and get there. And I felt that this year, again, it was the year to challenge it again. We didn't know if we'd get a solution. And we had a conversation the other day with the engineer that was responsible. And I just sort of said, tip of my cap to you, because it really got a lot further than I thought. And early on, we were kind of like, well, what if it was only on for the puck carrier in these specific scenarios, or only to make the protect puck mechanic better, so that as you're driving in, that it doesn't seem odd to have sticks going through things, and that you can really push the defensive skill stick away with your free arm when you're protecting the puck. Like, what if we just got that scenario right? How would that be? And the more we played it, the more those unique scenarios were like, oh, this is really cool. We have to keep going. And we felt kind of guilty at times pushing
X-Factor, das ist unfassbar.
Like, oh, here we are just asking for more and more stretch goals. But as we expanded it, I think it did move from being really cool for certain scenarios to really changing the overall meta of the game. And then the other piece is just, again, for people to kind of visually understand why things happen. So for people that have to know the game mechanics in the past, and like I mentioned before, say like, oh, because my stick
schöne Spiegelung, schöne Schattierung, aber die Zuschauer sind die gleichen.
Is confusing if you aren't
die Replays, das sieht
so now that
echt
you
gut
can
aus.
actually equate it to, oh, it's because my stick's held up. It just makes more physical sense and just what people already know of the real sport of hockey. You don't
Kommt
need
drauf
to
an,
kind of
Timo,
put
auf
it
die
through the
Situation.
filter of what's the game mechanic version of this thing. Will it hold up to things
Habe ich
like
mir auch
the
gerade
skill
gedacht,
stick?
Rosendorf,
I don't know. I think
das
when
wird
you get a
maximal Pro
mechanic
sein.
that you have one-to-one control with your thumb, it's really hard for us to come up with an innovation that meets that level. But I think in terms of the sum of the parts of the system, like we like to talk to often,
Haben die schon
in terms of
Dungeon?
visual
Ich weiß es gar
realism,
nicht.
it's really expanded the depth of player differentiation. It's opened up the doors for a lot of the X factors that we added in. So again, getting rid of a lot of the black and white mechanics. Like, players have been frustrated by incidental contact. I've been called out for that stuff all the time. Like, just turn it off. And it's funny because we also get people call out that all we care about is offense. And yet some of the main things that we get challenged on at the competitive space are the defensive things, like how easy it is to get shoved off the puck, or how easy it is to lose the puck.
Die sehen nicht mal bei FIFA gut
So
aus,
now
besser.
that those things aren't just kind of on or off, and that it matters how much strength you have on your stick, and that a player going
Sowas
into a
mag ich
pickup
halt
with two
total.
hands versus
So
one
cineastische
hand, that kind of
Wiederholung.
stuff we would have never been able to do without stick and physics. So it was really cool to see the doors open there and for things to physically make sense. So I think when you are someone who really pays attention to the sub levels of detail within the game, somebody who loves the authenticity, and for
Ja, die
us to be able
Eisquali
to
wird
do all
schlechter.
that
Siehst du,
and
Rosendorf?
overall
Da sieht man die
preserve
Abnutzung
a
jetzt
lot
6
of the,
Minuten vor Ende
core
des
game
ersten
balance that we had
Drittels.
before. Like, we worried, like, what if this gets too simulation within a 4-minute period game? Like, is the puck going to be loose all the time? It's really, really held up well. So I do ask the community in its edge cases. It's obviously the first year doing this. It's a big technical achievement. So hopefully they'll be kind to us and share with us the things that we can improve, as opposed to using examples of things that don't go right as a reason to go, oh, this should get turned off or it should be changed. I really hope that it is embraced. And from the early feedback from the technical test, I think that it is going well. But I really hope that this is only the start of being able to do more with that feature, and for us to get the stick and physics in more and more cases, like away from the puck and that kind of stuff as well.
Thanks everyone for listening. Please let us know what you think, and if you still have any questions around gameplay, we'll try to cover them in future content. Remember, you can listen to the full Q&A through the link in the description. But thanks again, and we'll see you October 4th.
October 4th. Da kommt der nächste Trailer. Liebe Leute, das war das Full Gameplay NHL 22. Und für alle, die auf YouTube zugeschaut haben, Daumen nach oben, wenn es euch gefallen hat.
Play it on the all-new Xbox.
Schreibt in die Kommentare, was findet ihr gut, was findet ihr nicht gut. Und dann sehe ich euch hoffentlich beim nächsten Video wieder. Bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss, ciao von now und tschüss. Mit Ös.